No one thought much of the drawing at first. A red balloon with long, spidery arms, legs that ended in points, and a face crudely sketched in black crayon. The smile was too wide, reaching the outer edges of the oval-shaped head, and the eyes were like holes, hollow and empty. The paper was crinkled from how tightly it had been held, and the name Mrs. Hoppy was scribbled under the drawing in a child's unsteady hand. It came from a first-grade classroom in a quiet suburban town, nestled somewhere between the ordinary and the unremarkable. The kind of town that's just a bit too sleepy, a bit too manicured. The kind of place where families have morning routines like rituals and kids play safely in backyards with trimmed hedges. The drawing was taped to a bulletin board along with other children's creations. Smiling suns, houses with lopsided roofs, stick families with pets. But Mrs. Hoppy stood out. It wasn't just the eeriness of the drawing, it was the atmosphere around it. Every time someone passed it, they felt just a touch of unease, a flicker in their peripheral vision, a tingle on the back of the neck. No one said anything, of course. It was a child's drawing. Nothing more. Except it wasn't. The child who drew it, Lily, had never drawn anything before. Her parents had described her as slow to develop creativity, preferring numbers and blocks to paints or crayons. But one morning, she sat in the corner of the classroom with a red crayon in one hand and black in the other, and she drew with focused intensity. She didn't speak. She didn't respond when called. Her teacher, Mrs. Blevins, had to gently take the paper from her when it was time to move on. When asked who Mrs. Hoppy was, Lily only said, "She watches me from the air." No further explanation. Her eyes didn't blink when she spoke those words. Her teacher assumed it was an imaginary friend, albeit a strange one, and mentioned it in passing during a parent-teacher meeting. That was the first day Lily didn't want to go to recess. Mrs. Blevins remembered that clearly, because Lily always loved recess. But that day, she clung to her desk with a kind of desperation that bordered on hysteria. When finally coaxed outside by promises of extra gold stars, she stayed close to the building, never lifting her head to look at the sky. Mrs. Blevins noticed it then. Lily's eyes darted upwards only once, and in that moment, her entire body trembled. She seemed to shrink into herself. When asked later what was wrong, Lily whispered, "She flies when I'm not looking. She has no feet. She just floats." Then she started crying. At home, things took a darker turn. Her parents, Carl and Dana, began finding pieces of the drawing scattered across Lily's room. Not torn, but cut. Perfect lines through the paper like it had been snipped by a precision instrument. They assumed Lily had done it, but she denied touching it. She insisted it had moved by itself. One night, Dana woke to the sound of whispering. It wasn't the television, they never left it on. The baby monitor was off. It came from Lily's room. She crept to the door, leaned her ear against it, and heard her daughter talking to someone in a hushed, terrified voice. But the most disturbing part was when she heard a second voice respond. A strange, hollow, almost rubbery voice, like air escaping a stretched balloon. Dana threw open the door, but Lily was alone. The drawing was back on her wall, even though they had taken it down and thrown it out 3 days prior. Dana took it down again and this time burned it in the fireplace. The smoke smelled like melted plastic. The following morning, Lily had a nosebleed during breakfast. She stared blankly at her cereal, blood dripping steadily onto her shirt. Dana panicked, but Lily didn't react, just muttered, "Mrs. Hoppy doesn't like fire." That night, Dana and Carl took turns watching her sleep. They told themselves it was just in case she got another nosebleed, but deep down they were afraid. Lily tossed and turned, mumbling in her sleep. At exactly 3:33 a.m., she sat bolt upright in bed and screamed so loudly that the windows rattled. "She's on the ceiling," she shrieked. "She's on the ceiling and she's mad." Carl ran in, expecting to find a spider or maybe a bat. Instead, he found nothing. Nothing but the ceiling fan slowly spinning, casting shifting shadows along the walls. Lily had clawed her sheets, her fingers bleeding from digging into the mattress. Her eyes were bloodshot. She didn't remember any of it in the morning. The school began noticing strange things too. Kids in Lily's class started having nightmares. One boy, Peter, said he dreamt of a red thing with no feet and a face that gets too close. Another girl said her balloon at a birthday party popped in midair, and something hissed as it deflated. No one took these stories seriously until one of the substitute teachers, Ms. Kennedy, suffered a panic attack during story time. She claimed she saw a face, elongated and wide-mouthed, watching from the window, floating just above the second floor. She was hospitalized for exhaustion and never returned. Lily began drawing more pictures. All variations of the same thing, Mrs. Hoppy. Sometimes in the sky, sometimes peering through windows, sometimes under her bed. But they were always done with red and black crayons. Nothing else. No background. No sun. No grass. Just the figure. And always with that same awful smile. A child psychologist was brought in. Dr. Helen Sparks, known for her work with trauma and childhood schizophrenia, spoke to Lily for several sessions. What she reported back left everyone stunned. She doesn't have schizophrenia. She doesn't hallucinate. She fully believes this is real. When asked to elaborate, Dr. Sparks said Lily described Mrs. Hoppy with consistent, unchanging detail across every session. She floats. She watches. She visits in dreams. She's angry when ignored. She's happy when you cry. She eats what's inside people. She pops you when you're empty. Dr. Sparks paused before adding, Lily believes Mrs. Hoppy once lived inside someone else before her. She says she came from the sky and needs a host. They found the original drawing again 2 weeks later, stuffed inside a locked file cabinet at school, sealed in a folder. No one had put it there. The cabinet hadn't been touched in over a year. The drawing was different. Not just crayon anymore. There were real fingernail scratches around the edges of the paper, and small smears of something that looked suspiciously like dried blood. That day, Lily vanished during recess. No one saw her leave. The cameras showed a blur, just a flicker of red and static across the screen at the exact moment she passed under the play structure. When the children were called back inside, Lily never returned. Her footprints ended at the edge of the field, but there were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no trace. Only her shoe was found, tied neatly, sitting beneath the swings. Later that week, one of her classmates brought in a new drawing. It was of a red balloon. Only now it had a second figure beside it, a little girl holding its string. The name written underneath was Mrs. Hoppy and Lily. The investigation into Lily's disappearance began immediately. Police combed the school grounds, brought in dogs, interviewed every staff member, and reviewed every second of surveillance. Nothing. No forced entry. No witnesses. No logical exit path. The teachers and students were questioned. Every child described the same thing. Lily had been near the swings and then she wasn't. When they pushed further, some of the children grew upset. One girl, Macy, burst into tears and screamed, "She took her! She took her up!" The balloon lady grabbed her and floated. The officer interviewing Macy paused and asked for clarification. Macy refused to say more, just kept repeating, "She floats. She floats." There was no logical explanation. The footage showed a strange digital distortion. A sudden vertical smear of red static at the exact frame Lily vanished from the camera. It was dismissed as a glitch, but the technician assigned to enhance it later quit his job. When questioned, he simply said, "I saw a face in the static. I'm not messing with that footage again." Dr. Sparks kept visiting the school. Something about the case haunted her. She'd seen plenty of trauma responses in children, but the consistency of the Mrs. Hoppy description, the same traits from multiple kids, even ones who hadn't been in contact with each other, troubled her deeply. Then she started seeing drawings, not just from Lily's classmates, from children across the school, second graders, kindergartners, even a few pre-K students. All variations of the same image. A red figure with a face stretched wide and unnatural. Stick-like limbs. Sometimes with strings. Sometimes floating. One particularly disturbing drawing by a boy named Jonah showed a whole line of children, each holding a red string, their faces all blank. Underneath, Jonah had written in pencil, "Mrs. Hoppy's Parade." The school's principal, Mr. Alder, considered canceling classes temporarily. Parents were pulling their kids out. Some accused the school of harboring a predator. Others whispered about satanic cults. Rumors and panic spread like wildfire, fueled by the eeriness of the drawings and Lily's unexplained vanishing. A local reporter, Stacy Lorne, took an interest. She had a background in child psychology and a knack for covering strange stories. She visited the school, interviewed teachers and staff, and was granted access to some of the drawings. When she saw the original Mrs. Hoppy image, she reportedly grew pale and left the room. The next day, Stacy showed up at the Blevins' home. Mrs. Blevins, now on extended leave due to stress and trauma from the incident. She had something to show her. It was a drawing from 23 years ago. Same figure, same balloon-like body, same smile, same hollow eyes, but the paper was faded, yellowed with age. Stacy had found it buried in an old article from the early 2000s, in an archived report about a missing boy named Elijah Carruthers. He had vanished from a school across the state. No clues, no evidence, but his teacher had kept one of his drawings, a disturbing red figure he'd titled "My Head Friend." Stacy dug deeper. There had been 4 similar cases in the state in the last 40 years. Always children between the ages of 6 and 8. Always after the appearance of a new imaginary friend. Always with drawings. And always gone without a trace. Stacy believed they were connected. She met again with Dr. Sparks, and the two began compiling what they called the Hoppy Files. They tracked down school records, contacted retired teachers, and even managed to get hold of a now-defunct psychiatric ward's records from 1982. There, they found a transcript of a session with a 7-year-old girl named Emily H., who had drawn hundreds of pictures of a lady with a balloon head who whispers behind clouds. Emily had vanished from a locked hospital room. The last photo taken of her, taken by a therapist during a behavioral study, showed her smiling and pointing up at the ceiling. Something odd about her eyes, wide, empty, and behind her, just barely visible in the grainy, overexposed corner, was a smear of red that looked vertical and rounded. Back in the present, children continued to report seeing Mrs. Hoppy, sometimes at recess, sometimes in dreams. Some began wetting the bed. Others stopped speaking entirely. A few claimed she hovered above the school at night, just barely visible under the moonlight. Stacy returned to the school parking lot one evening and aimed her camera at the rooftop. Nothing, just shingles and vents. But when she reviewed the footage later, there it was, a momentary flicker, less than a second, a shadowy red form against the roof, with a wide, black grin. The timestamp glitched right as it appeared, 3:33 a.m. She hadn't even been there at that time. That same night, the janitor, Ramon Alvarez, went missing. His keys and flashlight were found in the hallway. The camera caught a strange event. Ramon walking down the hall, whistling, then stopping, looking up, and then vanishing in a blink. The motion sensor lights flickered, and in one frame, just one, a red shape could be seen stretched across the upper corner of the hallway ceiling. Stacy posted the story on her blog. She titled it, "The Floating Lady. Something is Haunting Our Children." It was taken down less than 12 hours later. Her entire site was suspended. Her account was flagged for inappropriate content and promoting harmful conspiracies. She tried uploading the images elsewhere. Each time they glitched. The red figure would warp, smear, vanish from the frame. Even screenshots distorted. It was as if something didn't want to be seen. Dr. Sparks began having dreams. Always the same. She's walking through a foggy school hallway. Her shoes squeak. The lights flicker. She sees a door ahead, Lily's classroom. The door opens by itself. Inside, red balloons float motionless. Dozens of them. Silent. Weightless. And from the far corner, something begins to rise. She never sees it fully. But the fear in the dream is so intense that she wakes screaming, her throat raw. One morning, she found a drawing slipped under her door. It wasn't a child's crayon sketch. It was pencil. Sharper. More detailed. A woman's face stretched wide. Grinning too hard. Lips too thin. And instead of pupils, there were spirals. Underneath, in the same shaky, childlike handwriting, "You looked at her. Now she's looking back." Dr. Sparks stopped sleeping. 3 days later, she was found unconscious in her office. The word float carved into her desk over and over, like she'd used her own pen as a blade. Her fingernails were broken. She was institutionalized for her safety. When asked what happened, she whispered, "She's in the sky, but she's in your head first." Stacy vanished shortly after. Her car was found at the edge of a lake. Locked. No signs of struggle. Camera footage showed her pulling up at 3:33 a.m. No one ever saw her again. Inside the car was her recorder. One final audio file. It was nearly silent for the first few minutes. Just wind. Then a faint whisper. Words couldn't be made out. But the voice was high-pitched, airy. Almost like rubber stretching. And then, a single phrase, clear as day, in Stacy's own voice. "She floats when you're not looking." The file ended with a popping sound. The town changed after that. You could feel it in the way the children walked, heads down, glancing skyward only with dread. In how the parents began clinging to their routines as if the monotony could protect them. The school board installed new security systems. Police patrols increased. Mental health counselors were deployed. But none of it mattered, because it wasn't about safety. It was about belief. The less people wanted to believe, the stronger she became. The town tried to move on, but reminders lingered. Empty swings swaying on windless days. Red balloons appearing in strange places. Tied to mailboxes, floating in classrooms, caught in the branches of leafless trees. Every child who reported seeing Mrs. Hoppy was dismissed as playing along or traumatized by media coverage. But they knew the truth. They stopped drawing her, at least publicly. But in secret, the pictures continued. Drawn on bathroom stalls, under desks, carved into wood, etched onto foggy windows. Mrs. Hoppy was now part of the collective childhood folklore. Not a myth. Not an imaginary friend. Presence. 2 months passed with no new disappearances. And then the night of the spring festival arrived. The town held it every year: booths, carnival rides, games. This year, a balloon vendor set up near the school field. His display was impressive. 1,000 helium balloons of every color. But one color dominated the sky that evening. Red. They drifted upward like blood bubbles, floating over the children's heads, luminous in the sunset glow. The vendor wore a top hat, and no one could remember seeing his face clearly. He spoke softly and smiled too wide. Each balloon he handed out came with a whisper, "Don't let go, or she'll find you instead." Most thought it was part of the act, a creepy marketing gimmick. But when the sun fully set and the carnival lights buzzed to life, something strange happened. A hush fell over the crowd. Dozens of children, all at once, let go of their balloons. It was simultaneous, involuntary. Like a silent cue had been given. The red balloons rose quickly, almost violently, into the black sky. And then came the screams. One by one, the children began wailing, clutching their heads, pointing upward. A few collapsed, sobbing. One girl, 7-year-old Isla, began convulsing. Her parents rushed to her, screaming for help. EMTs arrived too late. Isla had fallen into a catatonic state. Her hands remained curled as if holding something invisible. When examined, her palms were covered in deep red indentations, tiny rope burns. Her final words before slipping into silence, She took the string. Now she knows my name. She never woke again. A week later, Isla's parents received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a crayon drawing. A child's rendering of a little girl with a red balloon tied to her wrist. But the string extended upward, past the frame, where a thin, white hand was barely visible. No face, no body, just the hand. Isla's name was printed neatly below, in her own handwriting. The town spiraled. Churches filled overnight. Psychics, ghost hunters, and YouTubers descended on the area. But Mrs. Hoppy never showed herself to them. Only the children, only the dreamers. The adults were simply echoes, background noise. She fed off innocence, fear, and imagination. And there was one place in town that still overflowed with all three. The elementary school. Mrs. Blevins, having returned after a mental health leave, tried to reclaim her classroom's sense of normalcy. But her desk creaked at night. The intercom crackled with faint, rubbery giggles. Once, during a spelling test, every student's pencil broke simultaneously. And the test paper, each and every one, had a red circle drawn around the name line. When the janitor tried to paint over the locker graffiti, dozens of crude Hoppy faces, they bled through the paint. Again and again. Eventually, the lockers were removed. It didn't help. One morning, the school librarian, Mr. Holbrook, opened a donated book and found a drawing tucked inside. It was old. On yellowing paper, pencil sketch, a woman with a balloon-shaped head, rising above a burning schoolhouse. The date scribbled on the back, October 1962. That year, an all-girls academy 20 miles away had burned to the ground. 6 students missing, never found. Their last teacher on duty, Mrs. Meredith Hopper. Some said she jumped from the top floor. Some said she floated. The connection seemed absurd, until a historian verified the details. Meredith Hopper was once institutionalized for delusions involving levitation and sky apparitions. Her diary, preserved in a local archive, included this line, repeated dozens of times. I saw her in the mirror. I saw her in the clouds. She's round. She floats. She watches. She is me. Stacy Lorne's sister, Amy, unaware of the full extent of Stacy's investigation, decided to dig further. She located Hopper's final surviving relative, a man named Joseph Hopper, now in his 80s, who lived in a remote farmhouse. When Amy visited, she was met with a man who barely spoke above a whisper and refused to allow her inside. But as she turned to leave, he said one thing: she wasn't my aunt. Amy turned. What do you mean? He stared at the sky. She wore my aunt's face. Amy asked more, but he simply shut the door. That night, Amy recorded herself summarizing the interview. Around 3:30 a.m., her camera picked up a sudden movement in the reflection of the window behind her. A balloon. No string. It hovered outside the second-story glass. When she turned around, it was gone. The footage never uploaded. The memory card melted inside the computer. Melted. Melted. Just like Meredith Hopper's school. Just like the eyes on every drawing of Mrs. Hoppy. Melting into hollow absences. Voids. That same week, a child in Mrs. Blevins's class named Jasper brought in a new drawing. Unlike the previous ones, it was done in full detail, colored pencils, not just crayon. It showed a tower made of bodies, stacked in a spiral. At the top stood the red balloon woman, arms spread, her grin split to the ears. Mrs. Blevins asked him why he drew it. He said, "She said if I made it perfect, she'd pick me last." Last for what? Jasper stared at the ceiling. To float. In the weeks following Jasper's drawing, the atmosphere at the school turned feverish, brittle. Children developed night terrors. Some refused to go outside. Others spoke in strange rhymes. Verses about floating and watching and being emptied out. One boy, Thomas, began taping his hands closed every night so he wouldn't reach for the string in his sleep. His parents found dozens of red scribbles under his bed. hidden like secret offerings. The faculty, torn between rational explanation and mounting dread, met after hours to discuss their options. Mrs. Blevins brought the new drawings, Jasper's among them. They were spread across the table like forensic evidence. Different hands, different artistic skill levels, but one subject, one icon, one name over and over. Mrs. Hoppy. Some faces in the room went pale. One teacher, Ms. Raymond, quietly admitted she had once drawn a figure like that when she was 7. In another town, in another state. She hadn't thought of it in 30 years, but the face in these drawings, it was the same. She remembered hiding it under her mattress, too afraid to sleep. Mrs. Blevins asked if she had any idea what it meant. Ms. Raymond only said, "I forgot her. Until now." That night, thunder rumbled over the town. But it wasn't storm season. The sky glowed a faint, unnatural red. Not lightning, not auroras, just a shimmering dome of light over the elementary school. Several parents claimed they saw silhouettes floating near the clouds. Tall, inhuman, smiling. The next morning, 3 more children were missing. No signs of forced entry. Doors still locked from the inside. Beds untouched. All that remained were red loops of string, coiled on their pillows like shed skin. The town cracked. Mass withdrawals from the school. News trucks. National attention. But the deeper the outside world looked, the harder it became to understand. Surveillance footage glitched. Interview recordings erased. Phones stopped working around the school grounds. GPS spun wildly near the fields. One reporter, desperate for footage, flew a drone over the school late one evening. The drone froze mid-air. This footage cut to static except for one brief frame. It showed the school roof, and a shape crouched there. Balloon-like head, too large for its shoulders. Arms too long. Fingers scraping the shingles. Watching the playground with hungry anticipation. The drone dropped from the sky, completely melted. The operator developed third-degree burns when he touched its battery. Then came the letter. An envelope was discovered in the principal's office. Unmarked. No postage. No fingerprints. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper. Folded twice. Scrawled in crimson ink. Childlike, yet deliberate. I was invited. You named me. You fed me. You drew me. I'm part of your story now. I'll be here as long as your children believe. And they believe harder than ever. There was no signature. Only a tiny sketch in the corner. A red balloon string twisted into the shape of an eye. The school was shut down indefinitely. Children were dispersed to other districts. Counselors were assigned. The town tried to bleach the stain from its memory. But across the state, then the country, similar stories began to emerge. Red figures drawn by unrelated children. Reports of floating faces outside second-story windows. Drawings that changed when no one was watching. A girl in Colorado fell into a trance and wrote a list of names. 7 of them matched the missing children from the original town. A boy in Oregon was found in the woods clutching a paper with the words, "She waits above," written over and over. He had drawn spirals in the dirt around himself. He didn't speak for days, and the drawings kept coming. Always the same figure, sometimes more detailed, sometimes crude, but unmistakable. Parents tried to stop it. They banned red crayons. They monitored their kids' art. They discouraged imaginary friends. But that only made it worse, because the belief wasn't seeded by the drawings. It was reflected in them. The entity had become archetype, meme, viral folklore embedded into the fabric of childhood fear. One psychologist at a major university coined the term balloon entity syndrome, initially a satire, until her own daughter was found standing on the roof of their home at 3:33 a.m., smiling at the sky. When pulled back inside, the child whispered, "I wasn't going to jump. I was waiting to be picked." Authorities didn't know what to do. You can't arrest folklore. You can't exile belief. But you can trace patterns. And one pattern emerged from the shadows. Wherever Mrs. Hoppy appeared, there was always one common factor. A drawing, a first image, a child's crude creation, the beginning of a doorway. Dr. Sparks, now slowly recovering in a private facility, offered one final insight. Her voice trembled as she spoke to a recorded interview, her hands shaking. She doesn't arrive. She's made. She's built. Every child who draws her, every one that fears her adds to her body, to her reach. She's a patchwork god stitched from scribbles and sleep paralysis. She looked directly into the camera. And if enough children draw her at once, she won't need to float anymore. The room fell silent, because at that moment, across the country, schools had reported dozens of simultaneous disappearances. And in every case, a red balloon was found, hovering just above the child's last known location, floating, silent, smiling. The official reports said it was mass hysteria, a media-fueled panic among children, fueled by internet forums and viral videos. Psychologists with clipboards and clinical tones blamed a feedback loop of suggestion, peer influence, and a shared need to mythologize fear. The balloon lady, Mrs. Hoppy, became a trending topic, a meme, a cautionary tale for digital-age parenting. But those who were closest to the phenomenon knew better, because their children didn't just vanish. They left marks. Tiny ones, yes, but too precise to ignore. Bent window screens where no one entered. Rope burns around wrists with no rope. Scribbled messages on ceilings. Drawings buried deep in notebooks. Invisible unless pages were held to candlelight. And in every instance, a name spoken in whispers, Mrs. Hoppy. She wasn't viral. She was viral because she was real. And what began as isolated incidents bloomed into something larger, something systemic. Children began having shared dreams across the country. A researcher in Maine interviewed 3 different patients, none of whom knew each other, who all described the same location. An endless sky of red, a floating playground, and a woman with a face like rubber and teeth like chalk. They called it the above place. It wasn't just imaginary. One girl drew a detailed map of it. Playground in the clouds. Upside-down swing sets. Spinning rings that howled. A seesaw that rose forever if you sat on one side. And in the middle, a red balloon tethered to the tallest spire, bobbing gently in air that didn't move. Above it, the sky wasn't blue or black, but paper white, waiting. And the spire? It was made of children. Drawn ones. Flat. Screaming without mouths. Stacked like cards. The map was confiscated. The girl vanished a week later. And in her place, pinned to her empty bed, was a perfect replica of the map, done in red thread embroidered into her bedsheet. No one could explain how it was made. A group of fringe researchers, cult hunters, demonologists, folk historians, began to gather materials. They found similar entities across cultures, though none exact. Balloon-headed beings, air spirits, sky women. In one obscure Japanese scroll, a red figure was described as the floating joyless mother, a yokai who snatched children who disobeyed and taught them the calm of the sky. Another tale from Norway spoke of the risen smiler, a crimson shadow who took the soft-souled and erased their footprints from the earth. They were all facets of something older, something not yet fully formed until modern childhood gave it the final tools. Crayons, screens, viral belief. Mrs. Hoppy was the name they gave it. But it was only one of many. A school in Australia found a similar rash of incidents. Children disappearing after drawing the lady up. In France, La Mère Caplain. In Mexico, La Señora Globo. Different names. Same face. Same smile. Same floating hunger. The drawings became relics, feared, burned, locked away. One underground group, calling themselves the Null Sketchers, began a mission to destroy every rendering. They published encrypted guides on how to spot Mrs. Hoppy symbols, how to prevent children from replicating her patterns, how to break the cycle of belief. Their forums were taken down within weeks. All members disappeared. Their last post, scrubbed from the web but archived by a few paranoid archivists, read, "She's not just floating now. She's walking. Her feet drag and stretch but don't touch ground. She's bigger. Your child is not drawing her anymore. She's drawing through them. One final event marked the conclusion, if it could be called that, of the known Hopi phenomenon. The town where it all began held a memorial for the missing. White candles, sky lanterns, speeches. A local pastor recited names, his voice trembling. At the exact moment the last name was spoken, Lily's, every lantern was extinguished mid-air. No wind, no movement, just snuffed. And above the crowd, silhouetted against a perfectly clear sky, hovered one single balloon. Red, larger than any balloon should be. It rose silently, then stopped. Hung there, watching. Every child present began to cry. Every one. Some covered their ears. Others clung to their parents and screamed that it was calling them. Phones stopped recording. Cameras glitched. Eyes watered. And for a moment, just a moment, a shape appeared in the air beside the balloon. A long-limbed figure, smiling, upside down. The crowd scattered. The town was never the same. Many moved away. Others locked down their homes, never allowing their children unsupervised time again. The school was razed. The land sold. But nothing was ever built there, because the ground remained warm and soft, and if you pressed your ear to the earth you could hear it, whispering, like rubber, stretching, laughing. Today, the story of Mrs. Hoppy is treated like an urban legend, a viral creepypasta gone rogue. But every now and then, a teacher finds a strange drawing tucked inside a math book, a red figure with no feet, a face drawn just a bit too wide, and underneath a name, sometimes Mrs. Hoppy, sometimes just her. But one detail never changes. The child who drew it always insists they didn't, that it was already on the page when they turned it. And when they try to throw it away, it always comes back, folded, waiting, smiling. The drawing came from a second-grade art class in a rural town nestled at the edge of a dense national forest. The school, Pine Hollow Elementary, was small, only about 130 students, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and Friday nights were spent watching Little League and eating funnel cakes at school fundraisers. It was a simple town, a quiet town. That's why the picture stood out. It was found on a table after class. No name, just a sheet of construction paper with a drawing and marker. Sharp lines, no colors but black and brown. The drawing showed a tree, not unusual for kids that age. Except this tree had over 100 faces in its bark. Not smiley faces, realistic faces. Some crying, some screaming, some contorted in agony, some missing eyes, some cut open. Each face was carved into the trunk, hidden in the branches, twisted along the roots like they'd grown there. The longer you looked, the more you noticed. There were people in the branches too, hanging. Tiny details, but deliberate. Black stick figures dangling by their necks. A girl in a swing, smiling too wide, her legs bent backward. And just beneath the tree, barely visible in the dirt, was a hand reaching out of the roots. One finger pointed at the viewer. The teacher, Miss Fenley, was unsettled but assumed one of the students had watched a scary movie they shouldn't have. She put it aside. Later, she asked the class if anyone forgot their drawing. No one claimed it, but one boy, Elias, looked away when she held it up. He hunched low in his seat, lips pressed tight. She didn't think much of it. Elias was a quiet kid. Loner. His parents were forest rangers who lived in a cabin just inside the tree line. He often smelled like smoke and cedar. His drawings were usually bland. Deer, birds, fire trucks. But that day he didn't turn in any art. At recess, Elias sat alone, staring at the tree line. That night, Miss Fenley brought the drawing home. She was disturbed, but something compelled her to study it more. The detail, the precision, the faces. She swore she recognized one. Her father. It was faint, almost subliminal, but unmistakably his nose, his half-bald head, his old World War II scar across the chin. He died when she was 13. He used to take her walking in those woods. She hadn't thought of that trail in years. She couldn't sleep. At 2:11 a.m., she heard rustling near her back porch. When she went outside, the night air was perfectly still. Yet the trees behind her yard swayed. Only the trees. And there was a smell, like sap and rot. She went back inside, unnerved. The next morning, she found muddy handprints on her back door. Small ones, like a child's. She lived alone. She returned the drawing to the school office and asked the secretary to keep it locked up. "Just in case," she said, trying to laugh. That was the last day Elias came to school. His parents reported him missing that weekend. They said he'd gone into the woods behind their house, his usual trail, and hadn't come back. No one noticed anything strange. No screams. No footprints. The dogs couldn't pick up a trail. The police searched for 3 weeks. Nothing. The only thing found was his sketchbook. It was wedged between the roots of a massive, ancient tree about 2 miles into the forest. The sketchbook was dry, untouched by weather. That was odd, considering it had rained for 2 days straight. Inside were drawings. Dozens of them. The same tree. Over and over. The faces changed, though. On the first page there were 5 or 6, then 12, then 50. By the final page, the tree was made entirely of faces. Bark barely visible. It was flesh now. Eyes bulging from the grain. Mouth screaming soundlessly. At the base of the tree, written in pencil, "I'm just one more." Elias's name was never found on the pages. But the last sketch included a new face, drawn more carefully than the rest. It looked like Elias. The town mourned quietly. They always had a strange respect for the woods. Old stories, native legends. "Don't wander past dusk," they'd say. "Don't follow the whistling." But now those stories returned with weight. Parents began pulling their kids from outdoor field trips. One girl, Sophia, claimed she saw Elias at the tree line after school. "He looked normal," she said, "except for his eyes. They were open too far," she said. "Too white. Too much eye." When asked what he did, she said, "He smiled and pointed at a tree. Then he walked backward into the bark." The police checked, of course. There was no sign of anything unusual. But that same week, more children began drawing trees. All on their own. All eerily similar. Dozens of papers flooded the art room. Trees with faces. Trees with limbs. Trees bleeding from the roots. And one particular drawing had the word "hollowing" scrawled across the top. No child claimed authorship. Ms. Fenley began researching local history. She contacted the Pine Hollow Historical Society, scouring old documents, church records, newspaper clippings. She found a mention of something called the Tree of Witness. An old settler journal from 1847 described a ritual among displaced tribes in the area. A warning more than a tradition. One tree, grown of bone and memory, said to remember all sins and show them in bark. The children see it first. The lost hear it whisper. Another passage. To draw it is to give it shape. To speak of it is to feed it. And they bury the children under the same roots. But the tree does not keep secrets. Miss Fenley stared at the words, her hand trembling. She looked at the drawing again, the one with the reaching hand. She hadn't noticed before. The fingernail was broken. The wrist was bruised. There was a bracelet drawn on it. A friendship bracelet. Green and blue. The exact one Elias had worn on his last day. Miss Fenley didn't return the drawing to the school after that. She kept it in a manila envelope at home, tucked in her closet beneath folded sweaters she never wore. But even there, it didn't feel safe. She knew it wasn't just paper and ink. She could feel its presence through layers of cloth and cardboard. It had weight, not physical but psychic, and she began to dream, not in fleeting, disjointed images, but in coherent cinematic loops. Each night, she found herself back in the woods behind Pine Hollow, tracing the old path to where Elias's sketchbook had been found. But the forest was wrong in the dream. Too quiet. The birdsong muted. The leaves blackened at the edges, trembling despite a windless air. Each dream ended the same way. She would reach the tree. The one from the drawing. Only it wasn't a drawing anymore. It was immense, thicker than a house, taller than it had any right to be. And it pulsed. The bark flexed like breathing. The faces, they moved, whispered, cried, pleaded. Some watched her. Some mouthed words she couldn't hear. Others screamed. One face, always the same, was Elias's. She always woke up before touching the tree. But once, just once, she reached out. Her fingertips brushed the bark. And the tree whispered her name. Fenley. Not Ms., not teacher. Just Fenley. She woke vomiting. The next morning, she found slivers of bark under her fingernails. She hadn't left the house. And that was when she noticed the faces around her. Not in people, but in things. Grain in the wood of her floorboards. The grooves in her bathroom tiles. Even the swirls in her coffee cup foam resembled tiny mouths, open in horror. The tree was bleeding into her life. At school, she tried to act normal. But the children were changing. Subtle at first, less laughter, more staring. Conversations cut short when she walked by. And the drawings, they were evolving. No longer just the tree. Now roots wrapping around people's houses. Branches reaching into windows. Eyes in the knots of wood. Tongues between leaves. And the word hollowing appearing more frequently, sometimes carved into the desks. It wasn't just a word. It was a process. She found one drawing left for her on her chair. No name. It showed a woman, her unmistakably, standing next to the tree. She was smiling, but her smile was wrong. Too wide. Her body looked hollow, carved from wood. Above her head was written, "She's almost ready." That night, she burned the drawing. The smoke turned green. She called a friend from college, now a professor of folklore. He listened to her story with silence and said only, "You need to leave. If the image has crossed from page to dream to body, it's almost fully incarnate." She asked what that meant. He said, "When something forgotten becomes remembered by too many at once, it grows teeth." She didn't sleep that night. She took sleeping pills, drank wine. Still she dreamed. And this time she entered the tree. It split open for her. The bark peeled like flesh, revealing a tunnel of root and rot. She walked through darkness slick with sap. And the faces, so many faces, lined the walls like paintings in a gallery of pain. They moved, twitched. Some cried her name. Others begged her to stop. At the center, she found a chamber, hollowed out, filled with roots that moved like worms. And from the ceiling hung bodies, suspended not by rope, but by bark grown around their chests, wrists, and ankles. They weren't dead. They looked at her, all of them children. Elias was there. He whispered, "She needs you to teach." "Teach what?" she asked. "To draw, to spread." She woke up gasping, her chest soaked with sweat, and her ceiling above her bed had a new crack, a long one, shaped like a branch. She called in sick that day, and the next. Then she packed a bag and drove 4 towns away, to a motel she remembered from childhood vacations. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Left her phone in the glove compartment. She thought maybe if she got far enough she could sever the connection. But the tree had grown past Pine Hollow. It was in her. The motel wallpaper had floral designs, red blossoms with winding vines. But as the sun set and shadows filled the room, the vines changed. They curled, shifted, and became roots. Each blossom a screaming face. She didn't sleep. The next day, she found a note slid under her door. A child's handwriting. "Even cut trees have roots. They're under you now." The cleaning staff claimed no one had approached her room. She tried to call her friend again. His number was disconnected. When she searched his name online, she found an obituary. He'd been reported missing 4 days earlier. All they found was his notebook, filled with drawings of a massive tree with hundreds of faces, and one phrase over and over, "She is the seed, and we are the fruit." That night, Miss Fenley returned to Pine Hollow. Not out of courage. Out of inevitability. She was part of the story now. The hollowing had begun. Pine Hollow had changed. Miss Fenley noticed it as soon as she crossed the town border. The air felt heavier. The streets were too quiet. Houses had curtains drawn, windows nailed shut from the inside. Lawns were overgrown, gardens wilted. It was as if the town had surrendered to something invisible. But the most telling sign? The silence of the woods. Not just an absence of sound, but a presence of silence. A kind that leaned in, pressed against your skin. A silence that waited. She drove past the school. Boarded up now, its playground rusted, the merry-go-round missing. The trees behind the field had crept closer. Or maybe they'd always been that close, and no one noticed until now. One tree in particular loomed larger, towering, as though it had fed on abandonment. She parked at her house just before sunset. Her neighbors didn't wave, didn't even peek through blinds. It was as if she'd been gone for years, not weeks. Her home was untouched, yet the doorknob was sticky. Sap? No. It was darker, smelled of soil, of wet roots. She entered cautiously. The air was stale. She flicked the light switch, nothing. The power was out. Or cut. Still, she moved toward the closet. The manila envelope was right where she'd left it. But when she pulled it out, it was heavier. Inside weren't just the original drawing and Elias's sketchbook. There were more pages now. New ones. Drawings she'd never seen before. Each more grotesque than the last. The tree with mouths instead of leaves. Faces in layers, like rings of a trunk, each one aging into the next. A drawing of her own house, roots snaking through the foundation, curling around her bed. And one final page. A figure stood at the base of the tree. Drawn in detail. It was her. Only she wasn't human. Her arms were branches. Her eyes were empty knots. Her mouth stretched down to her chest like a hollow carved into bark. Above her head was written, "The root mother comes." She dropped the envelope and backed away. But her foot caught on something soft. She looked down and screamed. A drawing was spread across her living room floor, so large it had to be taped together from dozens of sheets. It was crude, black marker lines, harsh and frantic. A map of the town. Every street labeled, every house marked, but some were X'd out in red. And around the town, forming a perimeter, were drawn trees. Dozens, hundreds, an entire ring. And they were closing in. A child's scrawl across the bottom read, "No one leaves now. She's growing." She fled the house, slammed the door, didn't lock it. What would be the point? She drove straight to the woods. She didn't know why. Only that the drawings pointed there. The dreams had led there. And her own life was becoming part of the bark. The deeper she drove, the less the road resembled pavement. Roots broke through the asphalt. Trees leaned in. Shadows moved without wind. Eventually, she stopped the car and walked. There was no trail, just a feeling, a pull. The forest floor was soft beneath her shoes, like moss and meat. She passed trees with strange markings, faces half-formed, smiling too wide, eyes half-closed as if dozing, watching. Then she found it. The tree. It towered above the others, wider than any natural growth. Its trunk throbbed. The air around it shimmered like heat, though the night was cold. And embedded in its bark were faces. Hundreds, maybe thousands, old and new, some rotted, some fresh, some familiar. She saw Elias. He blinked. Tears streamed from his wooden eyes. She saw herself, younger, older, split in half. And behind the tree, stretching endlessly like roots into time, were more bodies, suspended like puppets, limbs absorbed into branches, skin turned to bark, hair like moss. She heard a sound, not wind, not speech, whispers. Teach them. Draw me. Name me. Root mother. Root mother. Mother of hollows, and then silence. The tree split open. A vertical crack widened. Inside, darkness churned, moved, and something stepped out. It looked like her, but taller, twisted. Skin like bark, smile too sharp, eyes hollow and glowing with amber fire. The creature walked toward her without moving its legs, sliding over the ground as if roots pulled it. It spoke with her voice, distorted and ancient. You already began. You gave me shape. You showed them my face. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The thing raised a hand and touched her forehead. And then she was inside the tree. Not physically, but deeper. A vision opened. Children in classrooms drawing. Each sketch spreading veins through the paper. Into desks. Into the floor. Roots. Each face added becoming another rung in the ladder. The ladder built from belief. And at the top, not a throne. A hollow. Where something waited. Something faceless. Because it hadn't been drawn yet. Until she did. That's what started it. That first sketch she admired from Elias. The attention she gave it. The time she spent studying it. Sharing it. Feeding it. She opened her eyes. The thing was gone. The tree remained. And the bark now had a new face. Hers. Eyes wide in horror. Mouth open. Frozen in realization. She fell to her knees. Behind her the forest leaned closer. And whispered, "It's not done." She didn't remember walking back. Only the crunch of dead leaves. The scrape of bark on skin. The tree's whispers folding into her breath. She awoke in her car with mud-caked shoes and a smear of blood on the steering wheel. Her hands trembled. Her shirt was torn. It was morning. The woods behind her sat quiet. Still. But they felt closer now. Less like a place and more like an animal watching her exhale. Miss Fenley drove to the sheriff's station. She didn't know why. Maybe to confess. Maybe to warn. But when she entered, the deputy at the front desk looked up and said, "You're late." She blinked. "What?" "Your meeting. With the education board. About the new art program." What art program?" The deputy frowned, rifled through a clipboard. "You submitted it 2 weeks ago. Said you were returning from leave, wanted to implement creative witness sketching in 2nd through 5th grades. It was approved yesterday." She felt her chest tighten. "I never wrote that." "You sure? Your name's right here. Signature too." He turned the clipboard toward her. There it was. Her signature. Her handwriting. Except it wasn't. The loops were too sharp. The ink too thick. Like the hand that signed, it had splinters for fingers. She left without another word. Back at the school, she found the front doors unlocked. The building had been closed for months. Inside, the lights flickered unnaturally. The hallway smelled of mildew, dust, and sap. The art room was open. Children sat at tables, faces calm, hands moving in unison, drawing. Dozens of them. Miss Fenley stepped inside. No teacher. Just students silent and absorbed. She moved to one child, Sophie, from her last class. Sophie didn't blink. Her pencil traced a perfect circle over and over. "Sweetheart," Fenley whispered. "What are you drawing?" Sophie answered without looking up. "I don't draw it. It draws me." She turned the page toward Fenley. The tree, perfectly detailed. Far too advanced for her age. Faces carved into every crevice. And near the base a new addition. Miss Fenley, smiling, carved into the trunk. Sophie added one final touch. A branch growing from Fenley's mouth. "Stop!" Fenley shouted. All the children paused. Then, without prompting, every child raised their pencil and drew a line straight down the middle of their page, splitting the tree in half. Sap leaked from the paper. Real sap. Sticky. Red. The pages curled. Some burned at the edges without flame. The lights flickered off. And from every drawing, a whisper escaped. "Hollow her. Hollow her. Hollow her." Miss Fenley backed away and fled. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Birds no longer sang. The trees stood taller. The air grew thick with pollen and whispers. Everywhere she went, she saw more drawings. Taped to storefronts, nailed to telephone poles, stuffed in mailboxes, and always the faces multiplied. Old classmates, retired teachers, dead relatives, and now, children she'd never seen before. She wasn't alone in this anymore. The hollowing had spread. An old librarian named Mrs. Haskins found her at the church steps later that day. Frail and white-haired, but eyes sharp. She clutched a small wooden box and spoke without greeting. "You've seen the tree." "Yes," Fenley whispered. "Then it's too late. But maybe you can still close it." Mrs. Haskins opened the box. Inside were dozens of rolled pages, drawings, all of the tree spanning decades. "I've collected these since 1972, she said. "Every child who drew one gone. Or changed." Fenley lifted one page. The paper was brittle. The ink faded. The signature at the bottom read, E. Hopper, age 7. "I knew her," Mrs. Haskins said. "She vanished in 73. But before that, she spoke of a woman who whispered through the trees. Said she needed faces to fill herself." "The root mother," Fenley said. Mrs. Haskins nodded. "The oldest name. Older than Pine Hollow. Older than English. She's not just a ghost or spirit. She's a memory made hungry. Every time we remember her, she feeds. Then how do we stop her?" The librarian's face sagged with sadness. "You can't forget something that's been drawn. Not once it's part of the wood." She handed Fenley a match. "One way left. Burn the seed." "But what seed?" "You." Night fell. Miss Fenley returned home one last time. She laid out every drawing she'd collected, hers, Elias's, the others. Then she added her own. For the first time, she drew the tree. From memory. From the dream. She poured herself into it. Faces. Roots. The hollowing. She added herself. At the base. Hands raised. Mouth open. Then she opened her arms. And lit the match. Flame touched the corner of the paper. It curled inward, blackening the hollow she had drawn. The root mother's silhouette withered into smoke. One by one, the faces shriveled into coals. The fire spread quickly, unnaturally, leaping from drawing to drawing without hesitation. The entire room brightened. The walls pulsed orange. And then the house screamed. Not the sound of beams cracking or plaster combusting. This was a living scream. The structure shuddered like a dying animal. Sap bled from the floorboards. Roots pushed up through the carpet, tangled like fingers, reaching for her ankles. She didn't run. She welcomed it. She held the matchstick until it burned down to her skin. Didn't flinch. Her body hummed. She knew what this was. A seed can't unsprout. But maybe it could be burned from the soil. Her vision blurred. Smoke filled her lungs. The last thing she saw before collapsing was the tree. Alive again, in the corner of her eye, growing from her living room ceiling wide as the sky, its limbs piercing the roof, stretching toward stars that hadn't existed for centuries. Faces screamed from its branches. She fell into darkness. But it didn't feel like death. Felt like dirt. The fire department found nothing but cinders. No furniture. No drawings. No body. The blaze had been impossibly localized. Her house reduced to ash, while neighboring homes were untouched. No wind. No burn radius. Just a perfect circle of annihilation. Investigators found a single object amidst the rubble. A charred pencil, wrapped in vine. The town declared it a tragic accident. But something had changed. The children stopped drawing the tree. For a while, the forest seemed still again. Lighter. The boarded school remained abandoned, but rumors of laughter in its halls ceased. The art room's window, once blackened with soot, began to clear. And then came spring. The new growth was subtle. One small tree, near the back edge of the school lot, began to flourish. Too fast. It grew taller than its neighbors within weeks. Children began pointing to it. One boy said, "That tree's humming." Another whispered, "I had a dream I was inside it." But the parents dismissed it. They always do. Until one girl, Sophia, yes, the same Sophia who once saw Elias, brought a new drawing to school. She said she had to. Said it came to her while she slept. The picture showed a tree. But this one was smiling. The bark shaped into a face. Gentle, serene. Its arms open like a hug. Dozens of children sat beneath its branches, laughing. Above them, a woman stood, made of light. Her arms extended into the sky. Her face looked like Miss Fenley's. The teacher smiled and said, "She protects us now." Written in purple ink at the bottom, "Not all seeds grow monsters. Some grow memories." The drawing was displayed on the wall for years, framed, untouched. But on the back of the frame, written in nearly invisible ink, was a phrase no one noticed. "She sleeps in soil. She dreams in leaves. She'll rise again if you let them believe." Decades later, a new art teacher took over the program. She found the drawing tucked in an old file cabinet, yellowed but intact. She felt drawn to it, and that night, in the quiet of her home, she took out a blank page and began to sketch her own version of the tree. Her pencil moved on its own, and in her ears, a whisper bloomed like pollen. "Draw me again." The hollowing had never ended. It had simply gone to root, waiting for the next face. It started with a drawing on lined notebook paper, folded twice and stuffed into the crack between stair steps at Mapleview Elementary. The janitor, Mr. Hollins, found it while fixing a loose railing on the main staircase leading down to the basement. He didn't think much of it. Kids left strange things all over the school. But when he unfolded the paper, he paused. Drawn in graphite with incredible detail was a staircase. Not just any staircase. This staircase, right down to the chipped third step and the cobwebs on the underside. But what made it disturbing wasn't the accuracy. It was the figure beneath the stairs. A man, or something like one, bent backward in a twisted position that defied logic. His limbs too long, his arms bent behind his head, as though he'd folded himself into the shadows under the stairwell. His face was upside down, smiling, with one large eye and one small one, both staring straight up at the viewer. Underneath, in rough, shaking handwriting, were 4 words. "He watches from below." Hollins dropped the paper. Something about the image made his heart seize. He looked around. Empty hallway. But something didn't feel right. The silence was too deep. He closed the stairwell door and threw the drawing away. But later that night, as he was locking up, he passed that stairwell again, and heard breathing, slow, wet, deep, came from beneath the stairs. He opened the door quickly. Nothing. No one. Just the air, heavy with dust and the faint scent of mildew. He left early. The next day, a student named Kellen brought a drawing to his 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Margot. Kellen was a quiet kid, one of the daydreamers. He liked sitting near the window and talking to himself softly. His parents had described him as creative, maybe too much. The drawing he handed her showed a stick-figure child walking down a hallway. Above him were speech bubbles that read, "Don't look," and "He's under again." When asked who he was, Kellen said, "The man who lives in the crack." Ms. Margot smiled uneasily. "Under what crack, sweetheart?" Kellen pointed to the floor. "The crack under the stairs." Then he whispered, "He says you're next." She took the paper, lightly unsettled, and set it aside. That day, during lunch, she looked at it again. The stick-figure child was now circled in red. That hadn't been there before. She asked Kellen about it later. "I didn't draw the red," he said. "Who did?" He looked at her blankly. "He did. While I was sleeping." More drawings appeared. In lockers, under desks, folded into books that hadn't been opened in months. All variations of the same theme. Stairwells, hallways, and the twisted figure hiding in impossible positions. Behind pipes, under floorboards, inside lockers, always smiling, always upside down. One drawing showed him crawling out of a heating vent, his body snaking like rope. Another had him watching from behind a mirror, only the viewer's eyes reflected. He became known by a name the children whispered, the man under the stairs. A counselor, Mr. Brenner, was brought in to address the sudden burst of anxiety. Half the third grade had stopped using the stairs. Some refused to enter bathrooms alone. When asked about the fear, the children were vague but eerily consistent. He folds. He hides. He doesn't like being forgotten. He only moves when your eyes are closed. Mr. Brenner found it interesting, if unsettling. A group hallucination? Mass hysteria? He began collecting the drawings. By the end of the week, he had over 50. All from different students. All showing the same impossibly bent man with the stretched grin and uneven eyes. He began documenting them, taking notes. Then he started dreaming. Each night, he found himself in the school hallway, empty, dark, humming with a low vibration. And always, the door to the stairwell was open. He'd hear the breathing, the wet, sucking breaths of something enormous trying to fold itself into something small. And when he looked down the stairs, he'd see it, crawling toward him, backward, upside down, grinning. He always woke up gasping. After a week, he stopped coming to work. Left a message on the school's voicemail at 4:16 a.m. It was static-filled, hard to make out. But the last thing he said was, "Don't let them draw him again." He was never seen again. His apartment was left unlocked. Empty. Lights still on. The only thing out of place was his office wall, which had been covered in notebook pages. Drawings of the man under the stairs, surrounding a single photo. Class picture. All the students were smiling. But one child in the back row had no face. Just a drawn-on smile in black ink. And one eye bigger than the other. Parents complained. The school tried to do damage control. Teachers removed drawings from walls. Banned scary stories. Issued new school policies about psychological hygiene. But still, the drawings came. And one teacher found a message scrawled into her whiteboard before class. He's not imaginary. He's remembering himself. Ms. Margot couldn't sleep. Not after she found the newest drawing under her pillow. It showed her, at her desk, and under the floorboards beneath her feet, the man under the stairs curled in impossible shapes, watching with eyes like glass marbles. The back of the page had a message in smeared pencil. "You sat too long. He found your name." The school tried scrubbing away the drawings, locking the stairwells, and reinforcing the message that it was all pretend. A safety drill was held where the students were instructed to use only central hallways, while staff observed the staircases for mischief. Nothing happened that day, but something had shifted. Ms. Margot had begun finding folded drawings tucked in her personal items, her coat pocket, her grade book, even the glove box of her car. The most disturbing one appeared on her bathroom mirror at home, drawn in steam on the inside of the glass. She lived alone, and she hadn't taken a shower that morning. The drawing was simple. A stick-figure woman sleeping, a rectangular shape below her bed labeled crawl space, and within that space, two eyes, one large, one small, and the words, written backward, as though from inside the glass. "You forgot to check." She began taping over her mirrors, leaving lights on, sleeping with the TV volume high just to drown out the strange creaks her house had started making. Still, at 3:12 a.m. each morning, she would wake up. Always 3:12. Always to silence. Dead, unnatural silence. And sometimes, the sound of something shifting beneath her, like skin sliding against wood. She went back to the school on a weekend to retrieve her things. She intended to resign. Whatever this was, it had infected her thoughts too deeply. But when she arrived, she found the janitor's cart tipped over in the hallway. Mr. Hollins was nowhere to be found. The stairwell door was open. The air near it was unusually cold. She didn't want to look. She didn't mean to, but her eyes moved before her feet could obey her panic. And what she saw stole her breath. There, underneath the stairs, was a shape, pressed deep into the shadows. Bent and broken, limbs zigzagged, as though every joint had been rotated backward. But the head turned perfectly, too perfectly, and it smiled. The lips peeled wide, teeth jagged and gray. The eyes gleamed, one bulging, the other a pinpoint. And then it waved. Not fast, not frantic, just slow, patient, familiar. She slammed the door shut, heart pounding, and ran. But she didn't call the police. What would she say? That a drawing came to life? That something was nesting in the foundation of an elementary school? She went home and burned every drawing she still had. She deleted her phone's gallery. She scrubbed her search history. And that night she dreamed. In the dream, she was back at school. The hallway stretched impossibly long. Lockers twisted like warped jaws, open and moaning. Every door was ajar. From each room, whispers leaked, children's voices chanting in unison. He folds and bends. He waits and grins. He finds your name when silence ends. She moved through the corridor. The lights flickered above. And at the far end, the stairwell door, open. A man's hand, pale and long-fingered, tapped the step in rhythm. Each tap made the floor pulse. Her breath caught. She stepped closer. And then something crawled out. Not all at once, but in pieces. First a leg, bent like a disjointed compass. Then an arm, dragging itself like a rope. The head came last, upside down, eyes searching the floor as though sniffing for footprints. And when he turned toward her, he wore her face, but inside out. She woke with a scream that shredded her throat. And at the foot of her bed, a single drawing, folded once. No handwriting, just an image of her sleeping. And from the darkness beneath her bed, a pair of long hands creeping out, reaching up to caress her head. On Monday morning, the school held a meeting. 3 more staff members had quit. Half a dozen parents demanded their kids be transferred. A substitute librarian found a stack of unmarked envelopes on her desk, each one containing a drawing of a different staff member. Their eyes gouged out, mouths sewn shut. The drawings weren't childish. They were technical, measured, anatomically correct. School officials dismissed the rumors. Someone is playing a prank. It's viral behavior, a TikTok challenge. But that night, someone broke into the school and spray-painted a message across the main hallway. The more you erase him, the deeper he hides. The footage didn't show anyone entering or exiting. It did, however, capture a frame of static near the stairwell. Just a single flicker, and in that flicker, 2 white eyes. Uneven. Floating. The next day, the stairwell was sealed. Chains, padlocks, warning signs. But students said they could still hear tapping, even from across the building, and sometimes from inside their desks. When asked what they thought it meant, one girl named Riley said, "He's folding again. He needs more corners." Ms. Margot tried to quit, but her letter of resignation was lost. Her emails to the principal bounced back, and every time she tried to speak to someone about it, the conversation dissolved. Distractions, fire alarms, sudden coughing fits. It was like something was stopping her from naming him aloud. And that was the realization that broke her. It wasn't about fear. It was about naming. The man under the stairs existed because the children gave him space. Not just in closets and cracks, but in imagination, in words, in scribbles. The school was his womb, the paper his skin, the pencil his bones. And every drawing added to his structure. Another joint, another smile, another angle to bend. He was no longer just an image. He was becoming. Ms. Margot stopped teaching. Not formally, there was no resignation, no departure papers. She simply stopped attending class, and the school allowed it. Her room remained locked. No substitute was hired. No lesson plans were reassigned. When parents inquired, the administration said she was on indefinite leave for personal reasons. But the students knew better. Some said she still wandered the school late at night. Others claimed to have seen her face through the upstairs windows, mouthing something. No voice, just lips forming words silently, eyes wide and lifeless. The janitor who replaced Mr. Hollins lasted 2 days. On his second shift, he quit after finding a hole beneath the central stairwell, too small for a person to fit through, but impossibly deep. When he dropped a flashlight down to test it, the light never hit bottom. But something threw it back. Bent. Melted. Still flickering. That same night, he packed his bags and left town. The school called it electrical interference. But no one believed that anymore. Not after what happened to the art teacher. Mr. Grunley was new. Young, eager, fresh from university with bright eyes and a belief in expressive freedom. He encouraged his students to draw what you see when you close your eyes. And that's exactly what they did. Within days, the walls of the art room were covered in eerie pencil drawings. Not just of the man under the stairs anymore, but of places, spaces, cracks. One drawing depicted a classroom, normal at first glance. But under every desk was a hand reaching upward. Some fingers grasped at air. Some were already latched onto ankles. Another drawing showed the school itself, twisted inward like a spiral, the front doors bent like jaws. And in the center of every image, a single white eye, always off balance, one larger than the other. Mr. Grunley grew concerned. He started asking questions. He started collecting the drawings. He even created a folder on his personal laptop labeled Subject X. But after 2 weeks, he stopped showing up to work. A wellness check found his apartment empty, door wide open. No signs of struggle. Nothing missing, except for his laptop. The only clue was a note taped to his fridge. There are more corners than walls. He lives in folds. He bends us next. The handwriting matched a third-grade student's. A boy named Malcolm. Malcolm hadn't spoken in 3 days. He sat in class with a blank sheet of paper on his desk. His pencil tapped in rhythm. 3 times soft, 1 time hard. Tap, 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 thunk. Over and over. When asked a question, he simply blinked. Eventually, his parents pulled him from school. But before they did, a substitute teacher caught him speaking in the corner of the room, whispering to no one. He's almost shaped now. He just needs the face. That week, the drawings multiplied again, now appearing not just in classrooms but in hallways, carved into lockers, folded into the pages of textbooks where no one claimed to place them. One was found in the principal's desk drawer. A sketch of his own office, perfectly drawn, but with one addition. A trapdoor under his chair. It was labeled, Mouth. When he moved his desk, there was nothing. But the next morning, the carpet was ripped open. And underneath, a hole, roughly man-sized, coated in black dust. Ms. Margot returned to the school on a rainy Thursday. No one expected her. She looked thin, pale, her hair wet from walking. She spoke to no one. Went directly to the library. She asked to see all the old yearbooks. The librarian, unsettled but unwilling to refuse, handed her a stack. Ms. Margot flipped through them, starting with the current year and working backwards. The farther back she went, the more her face tightened. She stopped at the 1984 edition. A chill ran down her spine. In the photo for the third-grade class that year, she recognized a drawing pinned to the back bulletin board. Slightly blurred, but it was unmistakable. A staircase, and beneath it, a shape, bent like a broken puppet, his smile wide, his eyes uneven. She began cross-referencing names. Many of those students were listed as having moved away. Some had no records beyond graduation. A few were missing entirely, no digital footprint, no social security history. It was like they'd been erased. She dug deeper. A newspaper article from 1985 mentioned a local urban legend among school children. The man under the stairs. It described a rash of children refusing to use staircases, of teachers finding grotesque drawings, of chalkboard messages that would erase themselves. The school, at that time, had dismissed it as a story spread by overly imaginative students. But there had been one fatality. A teacher, Mr. Kellings, found dead at home, folded into an unnatural position at the foot of his own basement stairs. The coroner noted that his spine appeared to have been twisted beyond its natural flexibility post-mortem. The final line of the article: a drawing was found tucked in his shirt pocket. A single staircase, with the words he bends scrawled underneath. Ms. Margot printed every article, photocopied every yearbook page. She made a timeline. Each wave of drawings followed the same pattern. One initial image of the figure spread of sketches among students, increasing specificity in features, behavior changes, disappearances, vanishing of a staff member, attempted erasure, and then quiet but never finality. Because years later, always he came back, each time slightly more formed, more detailed, less like a sketch, more like a photograph. And she realized the truth. He wasn't just a fear. He was a blueprint, an idea constructed through shared vision. Every drawing, every whispered story, every mention was scaffolding. Framework. The man under the stairs wasn't in the school. He was the school, or becoming it, a structure made of shadows and silence. Mouths where corners meet, eyes behind fluorescent lights, smiles in floorboards, and he was almost finished. He just needed his name. Not a nickname, a true one, the original, the root sketch, the first whisper. And Ms. Margot intended to find it before someone drew it again. Ms. Margot didn't go home that night. She drove straight to the town's historical records building, a squat, unassuming brick structure behind the library, mostly used by genealogy researchers and dusty archivists. The clerk barely acknowledged her as she requested access to school blueprints, renovation permits, and basement construction plans for Mapleview Elementary. She was granted access to the backroom archives, shelves lined with yellowing folders and brittle files. The air smelled of mold and chalk. After 3 hours of combing through brittle paper and microfiche, she found it. A permit from 1979. Emergency structural reinforcement of lower stairwell following collapse. Collapsed? That wasn't in any record she'd seen. There was no mention of a cave-in or stairwell accident in any public-facing history. Attached to the permit was a handwritten note from the building inspector. Sub-basement cavity exceeded anticipated depth. No conclusive floor. Presence of residual organic material. Recommend seal-off. Area deemed structurally unsafe. Do not excavate. She traced the original name signed at the bottom. William J. Harold. She looked him up. He was reported missing in 1980. Found in his own basement. Folded. Bent backwards into a crawlspace so tightly that his chest had collapsed. The case was never solved. Returning to the school, she broke in through the back door. The stairwell had been chained and welded shut, but she brought bolt cutters. She didn't know why, only that it needed to be done. She descended slowly, flashlight flickering. The stairs creaked with every step, as though trying to speak. Each breath she took echoed unnaturally. As she reached the bottom, the flashlight flickered out completely. She paused, heartbeat drumming, and then light. A soft glow emanated from the far wall. Not electrical, luminous. She turned. The wall had changed. It wasn't concrete. It was paper. Layered pages, thousands of them, fused into an organic mess. Drawings, sketches of staircases, hallways, corners, mouths, crawling men, and at the center an empty outline, a silhouette, a human shape, arms bent, spine twisted, one large eye, one small. But the face was blank. Above it, the words, "The final drawing." Her hand moved on its own. She pulled a pencil from her pocket. No, she fought it, resisted, but her arm ached. Her fingers burned. Something compelled her, no, commanded her to draw the last piece, to give him a face, a name. She screamed and threw the pencil across the room. It bounced off the wall of drawings and vanished, swallowed by the paper. Then the wall breathed. The drawings rippled outward like water. Pages fluttered. Whispers poured out of the walls. Voices, children's voices, teachers, janitors, inspectors, all speaking at once. He sees from below. He folds and fits. He cannot exist without eyes. Name him and kneel. The outline began to shift, filling itself, the face morphing. Ms. Margot turned to run, but the stairwell was gone, replaced with more pages. Infinite. She was inside him, inside the space between folds, the place where bent things live. She fell to her knees, and for the first time she understood. The man under the stairs was never one thing. He was everything left behind, every forgotten corner, every unswept stairwell, every whisper in empty halls. He was what filled absence, and now he was nearly whole, because belief was the ink, and fear the eraser that sharpened it. She had one chance. She took a match from her coat pocket, lit it, held it to the wall of drawings. The pages smoked, curled, but they did not burn. The flame went out. Laughter echoed, low, wet, and from the paper emerged hands. Long, thin, dragging claws. They reached for her face, and from above, a voice like cracking wood whispered, "You will be my face." She didn't remember screaming, only the sound of paper, so much paper, tearing like skin, fluttering like wings, collapsing over her like a closing throat. The hands dragged her forward, not physically, but dimensionally, like being pulled into a crack in thought, a bend in the blueprint of the world. Her feet left the ground. Her body contorted, not painfully, but inevitably. Shoulders compressed, spine unzipped. She became the shape of a spiral, a coil, a stair. And in the moment before she vanished, she saw it. The first drawing, buried deep inside the wall of sketches. A child's hand, crude pencil lines, dated 1966. A single staircase, and under it, a figure with a blank face and a single eye. In the child's handwriting, "My friend under school." No name, no mouth, just the seed. That was all it took. One lonely child, one drawing, one belief that something lived in the dark. She understood now what the man truly was. Not a person, not a ghost, a belief system with knees and elbows, a parasite of geometry, a shape made of whispers, an echo that needed paper and memory to walk. And she had helped him stand. She woke in the nurse's office. Sunlight peeked through blinds. The school intercom crackled with announcements. It was as though nothing had happened. Had it? She blinked, dazed. A nurse checked her vitals. Said she'd been found in the hallway, unconscious. No sign of injury. Ms. Margot asked, "How long was I gone?" The nurse frowned. "Gone? You've been here 10 minutes. But she felt different, as if something had been emptied from her. Later that day, she walked the halls. They were brighter. The drawings were gone. The stairwell had been resealed, this time bricked over. Students passed her, laughing. No fear in their eyes. No hush in their tones. Had it ended? She tried not to question it, until she got home, and found a letter slid under her door. No return address. Inside, a folded drawing, black pencil on rough paper, a staircase, a new one she didn't recognize, and under it a figure, bigger, more detailed, no longer twisted, now standing. And its face? It was hers. A note scribbled at the bottom in jagged cursive. "He has his eyes now. Thank you for seeing." She dropped the paper. It slithered across the floor on its own, into the shadows. Years passed. Mapleview Elementary was eventually shut down for unrelated reasons. Budget, zoning, politics. The building stood vacant, windows dark, walls tagged with graffiti that never seemed to stick. Every coat of paint peeled faster than it should have. Every light flickered no matter how many bulbs were changed. A new development company tried to buy the land. They brought in surveyors. One returned with a strange report. Underneath the foundation, they discovered a massive hollow chamber. Unmapped, unstable. Digging further revealed layers of laminated paper, fused like sedimentary rock. Thousands of sheets, drawings. The project was halted. The area fenced off. The developer moved on. But children walking past the chain-link fence began to whisper again. He lives in there now. He remembers you if you draw. One kid, daring another, threw a crayon drawing over the fence. The next morning, he found the same drawing taped to his bedroom window. Only now there was an extra figure in it, standing in the stairwell's shadow, eyes wide, grinning, and beneath the paper, scrawled in pencil, "I fold better now." Ms. Margot lives in a quiet house on the outskirts of town. She doesn't teach anymore. She doesn't draw. She keeps the lights on at night and avoids staircases whenever possible. But every so often, when she dozes off in the wrong chair, she dreams. In the dream, the school breathes, and from every hallway corner, a shadow begins to unfold.